All right, so if I could have your attention, as we were thinking through topics to cover in this training, obviously there are a lot of things that are relevant and impacting how we view discipleship. But this idea or this issue with gender identity, gender dysphoria, obviously is prevalent in our culture, in our country, but obviously the last couple of years has been prevalent in our community of Dallas at the high school with the bathroom issues and those sorts of things. And so we thought it would be good to bring in Todd Miles. He is a professor up at Western Seminary. I think myself, David, and Jeanette have all had him as a professor, and knew that he would handle this biblically and practically and just be really thoughtful about it. So would you welcome up Todd Miles?
Thank you. It is good to be here. I bring you greetings from Western and from Hinson Church, where I'm a member, and I get to serve as an elder there. And quite frankly, I'd rather come and talk to you about discipleship or talk about gospel-centered transformation or something like that. But this is kind of like an occupational hazard. I get asked to come and talk about things like this. And I have talked about things like this all over the place. As you know, there's been a sea change that's just sweeping the land with regard to sexual issues. If you are, 50 and above, you're probably just on a moment of reflection going, how did we get here? How many of you remember when Rock Hudson died? Mysteriously, and then we were introduced to the phenomenon of AIDS and such, and that was not that long ago, and then to go from there, or even 20 years before that, just 20 years before that, to where we're at today and what's talked about and what we're going to be talking about today, it probably makes your head swim. And I know the citizens of Dallas are as familiar with this whole idea of a sea change as any. Let's review a few things that have happened in the last few years. Remember the Olympic champion Bruce Jenner, 1976. How many of you remember watching Bruce Jenner win the Olympic gold? That is the first Olympiad that I remember well. I have vague recollections of the 72 Munich Olympics, but the Montreal Olympics in 1976, I was 9 years old. I'm 50 right now, but I was 9 years old, and I remember him winning the gold medal. I remember him on the box of Wheaties. Y'all remember that? The first athlete that I remember being on a box of Wheaties. I'd never even eaten Wheaties before, and yet I wanted to eat Wheaties. That was really the first kind of commercial hero that I had. And then, as you know, he is now known as Caitlyn, thrust transgenderism into the public eye. Fall of 2013, just a little bit before that, a female student, Jace, at George Fox University requested to move from the female housing to the male housing because she had self-identified as male. And so she, in the vernacular now, would be known as a transgender male. Okay? George Fox eventually denied her request and was granted to do so by the federal government based on its religious affiliation. But what that case did was it made it very clear that general accommodation to a particular individual was not going to be good enough. There had to be policy change, period. There's a take no prisoners mentality in this issue. George Fox offered to give this individual her own room with her own bathroom. That was not good enough. She wanted to be in a male dorm with male roommates. Okay. November 2015, the U.S. Department of Education ruled that an Illinois school district violated federal Title IX regulations. Now, most of you, if you even know what Title IX is, are probably thinking, isn't that the thing that makes sure that there's as many women's athletic scholarships as men's athletic scholarships? I mean, that's kind of what it was supposed to be about. But now Title IX regulations are being evoked in this issue. Administrators had prevented a transgender female from using the girls' facilities. This also came with the loss of federal school funding, so it came with some bite. At the same time, right here in Dallas, y'all remember, local school district sent letters to the 67 students who were in a transgendered boys' gym class announcing that they would allow the student to use the boys' locker room. You all know, you lived through that, and in that, you're all very well aware of the community uproar. I mean, I was reading about it in the Oregonian of what's going on down here in Dallas, Oregon. I'll be honest with you, right? Most people in Oregon think Dallas is in Texas, right? Y'all know that. And I mean, even when I told you I was going down to Dallas, they were going, "You're driving to Dallas? Why don't you fly?" And yet, if people know anything about Dallas in the larger, and especially Portland area, it's because of this issue, right? It's because of this issue. No small community uproar over that announcement. We move on. April of 2016, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled in favor of a transgender male student who wished to use the boys' bathroom at his rural Virginia school. Now it's U.S. Court of Appeals. How much higher can we go? We're not too many steps away from the U.S. Supreme Court at this point. 2016, then again, here, the Oregon Department of Education laid out sweeping changes to protect transgender students, and now the Oregon Department has adopted standards for a sexuality-based health curriculum. And I'll give you the number if you want to write it down. It is Oregon Administrative Rule 581-022-2050. You can Google it and read it. It is... You might have Covenant Eyes on your computer, and it will reject it because of the language that is used. It's that explicit. Schools are going to be required to comply with this next year, and so school districts are now, or at least they ought to be. They have been forewarned. They're probably discussing the implications for their clientele. How do we initiate and install this K through 12 curriculum? And it basically green lights explicit teaching on gender issues and the different types of sexual expression, many of which will make you blush, hopefully. This requires districts to be proactive in instruction in these areas. The curriculum covers, again, issues related to gender dysphoria, and then healthy, or what they are defining as healthy sexual expression, and the different types of sexual expression, etc. So that's where we're at here in Oregon. Now, I'm talking to a church though. So there's two issues here. There's a public policy issue, a legal issue. I've mentioned the community discussion related to what the local school district was doing. And you as Christians, you have a right to voice your opinions, okay? And as I think people who are listening to Paul's instruction in the book of Romans, where we are required to honor the emperor, okay? In our constitutional republic, one of the ways, not the only, but one of the ways that Christians honor the king, so to speak, is we participate in our constitutional republic, largely democratic process. Okay? So just opting out as a Christian, saying, well, that's just a government thing, I'm not going to be involved, I don't think that is a legitimate option. That doesn't mean that everybody has to be a social justice warrior, or everyone has to be picketing or whatever. But I do think that we have to be involved. I think that's what we do as citizens of the United States of America, of the state of Oregon, as people here in Dallas. And you're doing that as a Christian, and you are responsible to do that. You are to be salt and light. If people are not going to, let me rephrase that. If you don't speak up to give God's perspective on these issues, how are people ever going to hear it? Okay? You are the ambassadors of Christ. And Jesus Christ's rule extends beyond the boundaries of the local church. Last time I checked, he's Lord of the universe, right? And he's doing quite well. and you are his ambassador. Okay, so there are implications for you there. We can talk about those if you want. But there are larger implications for you as a church. What are you supposed to do, again, from a policy standpoint, but also just in terms of being salt and light and being a welcoming community to those who need to hear the gospel. Okay, so we can talk about that as well. Hopefully we'll talk about a little bit of both those things. What do we need to know? So some vocabulary. And maybe you don't need to go through this because you've already worked through it, but a lot of places it's all brand new stuff. What is gender dysphoria? What is it? Well, gender dysphoria is what we now call something that used to be called gender identity disorder. Now, even the name change indicates a bit of the sea change that has taken place, right? It used to be recognized as a disorder. There is something wrong with a person who is, say, born biologically a male and thinks now that they are a female, or vice versa, right? This language comes out of medical journals and out of psychiatric guides and dictionaries and encyclopedias. It's just what was taught. Now it's called gender dysphoria. Dysphoria suggesting that there is distress that is caused, and probably ought to be caused, or is felt. Let me rephrase that. There's gender that is felt and ought to be felt when you self-identify as a sex other than what you are biologically. And that causes distress. And so that now we call that gender dysphoria. So some of the vocab that's important here, your sex is what you are anatomically and biologically and chromosomally. Physical, biological, anatomical dimensions. Now, there's a group of people that are intersex, okay, but those individuals are recognized as some abnormality has taken place, right? They might have a Y chromosome, an X and Y chromosome, but they don't have all the male anatomy, okay? Even today, medically, we would say there's something wrong there. Okay, it's important for us to recognize that something has gone wrong there physically. Something has gone wrong there physically. And so the category of intersex people, it doesn't really apply to what we're talking about here. Because unlike intersex people, people who are transgendered or experiencing gender dysphoria, they have all the normal piping. They have all of the chromosomes are working fine. The anatomy is all as it's supposed to be. Physically, there's nothing wrong. Mentally, emotionally, probably. So your sex is what you are biologically. And you know what? There's no changing that. We talk about a sex change operation. There's really no such thing. Okay? You can't turn a woman into a man. You can't turn a man into a woman. You can do some window dressing with it, but if you look at DNA and you look for the chromosomes, you're either a man or a woman. Now, you can change the appearance, I think fraudulently, and you can put on a little bit of what we might expect a woman to look like or a man to look like, but biologically, you're either a man or a woman. And you can't change that. You can't change it. We'll talk maybe about some of the implications of that. Your gender, though, is different today. Now, I don't know, again, I feel like I'm like this old guy now because I talk about how it used to be. And I never used to be one of those people that talk about how it used to be. But who would have ever thought there'd be a difference between sex and gender? Those were just interchangeable terms. But your gender now is the psychological, social, and cultural aspects of being either male or female. And then your gender identity is then how you experience yourself as either male or female, right? And so that doesn't necessarily have to match, in the minds of many today, what your biological sex is. And so you experience gender dysphoria if your gender identity is male, but your biological sex is female, and vice versa. It's just that feeling of distress. Okay, you are technically labeled with gender dysphoria if you have a distress of at least 6 months, and it has to be significant. So significant distress for 6 months will land you into this category of gender dysphoria or maybe even transgender. Okay. So like if a 5-year-old boy wakes up and wants to put on a Wonder Woman costume for a day, that's no cause for alarm. I'd be alarmed if parents were going out and buying that for the boy, but that's no big deal. Now, if you're like 15, 16 years old and you have distress for 6 months or longer because you feel like you're a woman or want to become a woman, and you are a male biologically, then you would land into this category of gender dysphoria or even transgender. Okay? Does that make sense? You don't even have to come out and self-identify or say, I want to be a woman, even though you're a male biologically. If it's an emotional and mental struggle for you for at least 6 months or so, clinically you are called transgendered at that point. We all there? Okay, so that's about where we're at. Current estimates in the United States that about 0.3% of the US population has a self-identified gender dysphoria. Now that doesn't mean that they've come out and say, I want to be male, I want to be identified as a male, I'm embracing a male. Well, I should rephrase it because I'm a guy standing up here. That would not mean that, so let's say that I was experiencing some sort of gender dysphoria for 6 months and clinically I might be seeking help for it. That doesn't mean that then I say, you know what, I'm going to embrace a female identity. It could be that I just struggle with it. Okay? And it would still be in that category of transgender or gender dysphoria. Does that make sense? All right. So you don't have to start wearing dresses or anything like that to be part of this gender dysphoria. Okay. What that suggests, now, maybe that number seemed really high to you. Does that number seem high? I mean, like 0.3%? That seemed really high to me until as I've done some reading on this, I realized that there's different levels of gender dysphoria amongst people, and some people just, it's just kind of inclinations that cause them struggles. There's people who go to counseling for it. There's people who are married, who haven't told their spouses, who are going to counseling for it, and said, I'm kind of struggling with this. There's a spectrum of folk out there. And now, why am I belaboring this? Because you never know who's going to walk into your church. You never know who you're sitting next to, what they might be struggling with. A person could be struggling. So, let me back up here. Gender dysphoria is a real thing. It's a real thing. As I'm going to say here in a little bit, it is a product of the fall. It's a product of the fall. And it is a real thing that real people struggle with, including people who have come to faith in Jesus Christ. And they will come in, they'll be in your church, they might be members of the church, and some of you, maybe even some of you, have just kind of struggled with this a little bit. And you want to be godly, and yet there's something that you feel is wrong a little bit. And we just need to recognize that we live in this fallen world and people struggle with these things. The person who walks in your door might be someone who has self-identified as a male, even though they're a female biologically, and they have planted their flag in the ground and they're making a big stink about it. That might be a person who walks in your door. Another person who walks in your door might be a man who just feels a little bit on the effeminate side and kind of wishes every now and then that he was, or wonders, was I born in the wrong body? Okay? People like that are all over the place. Okay, what does the Bible have to say about this? There. In a very broad and general sense, the Bible actually has a lot to say about it. In a very specific and explicit sense, unfortunately, not very much at all. There are not that many verses that you can go to. There are some specific passages that speak to men dressing as women and men sleeping with men when it comes to homosexuality, as they would with a woman. what this tells us is that the behavior is symptomatic, I think, of living in a broken world full of broken, sinful people. That is what we live in. We are broken people living in a broken world full of other broken people. We just need to remember that all the time. All the time. There are some oft-cited passages. I gave you a list of them. For this transgender issue, Deuteronomy 22 verse 5 is often evoked. It's very clear. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. Now, obviously there's cultural implications for that, because in that society there was what was clearly women's garb and there was clearly men's garb. And for this covenant community of Israel that is entering into the promised land where they are supposed to be different than the nations around them, the Lord said, I want you to be different because you are different. You are a set apart people. You are my people, my chosen people. And so you are to be different. I have made you holy. I've sanctified you, set you apart. Okay, remember when Deuteronomy is written, the people of Israel are on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and they're about to go into the promised land where they will be surrounded, totally surrounded on every front. Worse than what Israel is right now. And Israel's pretty surrounded, but they even had enemies on the west side of them, which is where the Mediterranean Sea is. I mean, they were like this, in this little land-encamped enclave with enemies everywhere around them. And the Lord said, you're different than them because you're my people. And to ensure that you're different than them, I want you to dress differently than them. I want you to eat differently than them. I want you to worship differently than them. And so much of what we read in the Mosaic Law is bringing to bear this commitment to being different in so many different ways. Does that make sense? And one of the ways was men are supposed to dress like men and women are supposed to dress like women. And you can't, there's no cross-dressing in here. So culturally, there was something that was very much identified as men's garb and something identified as women's garb, clearly. Deuteronomy 23:1, no one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. This is becoming part of that covenant community that was Israel. Again, here's just this idea of holiness and being part of this covenant community. There's a little bit of difference between that community and the church, I would argue. The church is a new covenant community where there are new rules because there's a new man in town, Jesus Christ. He's the Lord of the church. And what makes people different from the world in the new covenant is different and better than what made Israel different from the people around them. The new covenant is everything you talked about, the gospel, the heart change, where you're transformed from the inside out. There are no rules about how you dress, about what you eat. That's not what is to identify a disciple of the Lord Jesus Christ. It is the fruit of the Spirit, which is the great new covenant blessing, the Spirit of God. Not necessarily, not eating bacon or pork products or that sort of thing. Okay, does that make sense? But that's not to say that all of those things were just totally arbitrary. But we can talk more about that. Matthew 19:12, Jesus. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. I don't think this has hardly anything at all to do with this discussion of transgenderism. Jesus is talking, I think, here about people who have committed themselves to a certain kind of lifestyle for the sake, in this point, at the end, they've made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. It might have some implications, but I don't think we can just quote that verse and say, therefore, dudes have to be dudes and women have to be women. What else is on here? Romans 1, for this reason God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were concerned with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving themselves the due penalty for their error. This speaks very much, I think, to the issue of homosexuality. Paul is making an argument from nature. He's making an argument from conscience as well to the Romans, who are not covenant people. They're not people who have been reading the Bible. He's not making an appeal to special revelation. He's making an appeal to general revelation to make the case that is also made in special revelation that marriage and sexual behavior is to be between men and women in a covenant relationship. And he makes an argument from nature to this effect. I think it's very powerful. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But any thoughts? Yes. Go ahead.
Acts, you put down here Acts 26, and if you go from 26 to 31, and you talked about a new covenant
Yes.
from the Old Testament to the New Testament. If you read Acts 26 through 31, you will find that the eunuch is asking for somebody to teach him the Bible.
Yes.
So this is an example of the new covenant versus what you were talking about in Deuteronomy 23:1.
Yes.
They're just almost contradictions of each other.
I don't necessarily think so, because I don't think that the eunuch here is disqualified from being part of the new covenant.
Oh, I'm saying the new covenant, but what I'm saying under the old covenant, he wasn't supposed to be in the congregation.
Yeah.
On the new covenant, he's supposed to be here where we can
Yes.
teach.
Yes. And so how did one become a part of the assembly, part of the covenant community of God? You had to go through a process of proselytization. There was a whole, you had to become circumcised if you were a male. Hard to do that. If you're a eunuch, you can't bear the covenant, you can't bear the covenant mark. And so you would not be able to join the covenant community. You could become what is called in the New Testament a God-fearer. And there were parts of the temple that were open for people like that to worship. But no, you could not become part of the covenant community of Israel. I think that's why the new covenant is a better deal.
Okay, so what I'm getting out of Acts is that we should welcome these people into our church from a Christian standpoint to be able to minister to them.
Well, no one would have kicked the eunuch in the Old Covenant out of Israel. They just could not become part of the covenant community. They could even still go to the temple once it was built and worship in certain areas, but they couldn't go as far in as people who were part of the covenant community. Yeah. But as people in the people in the new covenant, the church, which is in some respects more exclusive, but in many respects more inclusive. This is one of the places where it's more inclusive. That a eunuch, so to speak, here. Let's say that there's someone who is transgender who has actually gone through reconstructive surgery to make themselves look like a woman. That person could come to Christ and could become a full member of the church. Yeah. But you can't become a full member of the church unless you come to Christ. You can, hopefully, here, you can come and listen, right, anytime, anybody's welcome, but we won't baptize you, make you a member of the church, unless you become a part of the Spirit-baptized Universal Church of Christ. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. What does the Bible have to say about this? I think we need to think in terms of the narrative of Scripture, the storyline. I like very easily to think of creation, fall, redemption, sanctification, consummation, or glorification. Creation, what do we learn here? Well, Genesis 1 and 2 are really important chapters in the Bible. I don't even know that the rest of the Bible makes sense. If you were to cut out Genesis 1 and 2, I'm not sure that it would make sense at all. It's that important. what do we find here? We find in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So right off the bat we are confronted with what we call the creator-creature distinction. In short form it's this: God is God and you are not. There are two kinds of things that exist. There's God and there's stuff that he made. And if you're stuff that he made, then you're not God at all. And if you are God, then you're not anything that was made. And we smile at that, but that's just the first verse of the Bible. But if you go sideways on that, and maybe people in Dallas don't go sideways on that, but you walk down the street of Hawthorne Boulevard in Portland, Oregon, where I live, and everybody's screwing that one up. Watch Oprah, and well, okay, don't. But if you were to watch Oprah, you would see all this divine spark and, God, whatever. Okay, so, but Genesis 1:1 says no. There's God and then there's stuff that he made. And we call that, in theological terms, called the creator-creature distinction. It's really important, really important. And what that tells us is that God made everything, and so he has creator's rights over everything. Well, one of the things that he made, for our purpose here, he makes male and female. He makes humans. And there are biological sexes in the other animals, but we see the care that is, and the intentionality that is brought to the creation of the first man and the first woman. It is really, really important. They are like each other, the man and the woman, Adam and Eve. They are like each other in that they are both human. Okay? And so, remember Adam, the solitary man, no woman at this point, and he is lonely because he's and God for the very first time says it is not good that man should be alone. Everything that God has made up to this point, he has put in that divine stamp of imprimatur on. It is good. God, the creator, the all-knowing one, the all-wise one, looks on what he's made and he says, this is good. I like it. All right. Over and over again, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good, until you get to the seventh day, or the sixth day, I suppose, and he says, this is very good. God likes what he made. That's just not a statement of idiosyncrasy, where this kind of weird God kind of likes what he made a little bit. So, no, this is the creator God who's saying, I like it. It is good. What I just did, it will work. And I like it. Okay? So there is authority in that statement too. And for the very first time, God says it's not good. When he looks on the solitary man, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Well, before he does that, he actually is kind of, I say this with confession that God is loving and kind, but it almost seems a little cruel. He parades all the animals before Adam. And Adam watches all these animals go by and he sees male, female Adam, or horse, male, female cow, male, female, whatever. And they're going through. And it just solidifies the fact that there's no one like him. There is no helper suitable for Adam in the animal kingdom. There's no one like him. So what does God do? He makes someone like him. He makes someone like him. Eve is like Adam in a way that dogs, man's best friend, right? Well, no. Dogs are not man's best friend, right? Because they're not like us. They're not like humans. They're not like humans. But Eve is. And you hear this, like he bursts into song. At last, he says at last, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. There you go. And you're familiar with all that. But Eve is different than Adam also, right? In wonderful and glorious ways. So God makes someone like the man, but also different than the man as well. And that difference is engineered into the creation, the first man and the first woman. He makes a sexual other for Adam. They have different roles for which they're designed. The function flows from the design. God calls the intentional creation of the male and female good. We see that in the synopsis of the big thing in Genesis 1. God creates man and woman in his image. We don't get that for the animals. Animals are not created in God's image, and the intentionality and detail that we get in the creation of the first man and the first woman is not found with the other animals either. So there's something unique and powerful and good about being a man, being a woman. It's by God's good design. And remember, Genesis 1:1, creator-creature distinction, God has creator's rights over it. And so, to be perfectly blunt, if God makes you a man, then you're a man. And he has the right to say, you're a man. Okay? Even if the man says, I don't really like that. Well, you're the creature, not the creator. How do you know what you were created to be? Look at what you got. Anyway. All right. So then, sin enters the world. Genesis 3, also really important, isn't it? Genesis 3, very, very important in the biblical storyline. Because we now live in this broken world, and we are affected to the very core of our beings. Every aspect of us is affected, and it hits men and women as women. Look at the cursing that God does on the woman and the cursing God does on the man. They strike right at the gender distinction and differences. Right? Now, the roles, I do not believe, gender distinction and gender roles don't come from the fall, but those distinctions and differences are cursed, and they're exasperated. And what was supposed to be different but good now becomes different and really hard. Different and frustrating. I mean, think on it. What was the very first thing that Adam and Eve did when they had sinned, and they knew they had sinned? What did they do? They hid. Hid from... Well, actually, no.
Each other.
They hid from each other. Why? How did they hide from each other? They were ashamed of their bodies. Isn't that amazing? One of the very first implications of the fall is that there's an awkwardness and a shame at the difference. Right off the bat, right out of the gate. Is it any surprise that we would have something now, 2006, 8, 10, 12, however long it's been since Adam and Eve, years later, that we now call gender dysphoria? I just got to say, isn't it amazing how fast all this has happened? We should be thinking, what took it so long? Because right off the bat we find this, and now we've had thousands of years of sin propagation. It should be no surprise that we are at where we're at right now. In all of creation, form and function are affected by sin. The scriptures prioritize the creation of the male and the female, the first marriage. It should come as no surprise that when sin enters the world, man as male and woman as female are affected. The first symptoms of the fall, awkward embarrassment, shame about their bodies. Remember, before sin, they were naked and unashamed. Now they are ashamed. They realize they're naked. And that's one of the very first questions that God says, who told you you were naked? Right? Well, it's pretty obvious, but I mean, that's just one of those God questions where he's inviting discussion. It's not like God didn't know. Whoa, what happened here? Marriage and sex would also be affected. Just look at the whole sexual revolution, far more recent. Again, as Bible readers, we should be thinking this: what took so long? What took so long for the sexual revolution? Well, I think there are good historical and I think even spiritual and church reasons for why so much of society was held restrained. So there's good reasons for that. But there's also good reasons as to how we got where we're at right now. And we find them in Genesis 3. We live in a broken world full of broken people, and we're broken people too. So marriage and sex are going to be affected. So I go around and talk about homosexuality a lot to churches. And here's what I have to say. I have to say that homosex, and here I'm talking about the activity of sexual intimacy, is a sin. So homosex is a sin. And I need to say that, but I have to say it in two different ways to two different groups. If you're older than me, I have to remind people that homosex is a sin. It's not the worst sin. It's not the unpardonable sin. It's a sin. But it's just a sin. Okay? It might be creepy to certain people's sensibilities, but it's just a sin. It's not the worst sin out there. I have to remind people younger than me that homosexuality actually is a sin. Okay? It is a sin. It's wrong. It's wrong. And the Bible could not be clearer on this. From Genesis through Revelation, just straight, it's a univocal voice, one voice throughout. Okay? And we need to remember that. What else comes of this? Oh my goodness, look at that. Radical individualism comes from this, to where people forget that creator-creature distinction. Now it's how I feel. how I feel. Not so much what God has said, but how I feel. Even Gnosticism, that ancient heresy from the past, with a radical dualism of the spirit is good, but the material is bad, that has kind of made its way into our thinking in a non-religious sort of way, where we think that the material is kind of bad and it doesn't actually have the right to dictate anything to us. And if you think about that, that's just totally insane, right? Because we live in a physical world where physical laws, we obey them all the time. And we try to disobey them at our own peril. At our own peril, right? The law of gravity stands. It's largely undefeated. Every now and then Michael Jordan or LeBron James can violate the laws of gravity, but they're really not violating the laws of gravity. And so we live in it, and we're just used to it. But now there's just almost just nonsensical, illogical idea that this material world that we live in, it's like it doesn't count or it doesn't matter. And how this affects this discussion here is that how you're born and your anatomy does not have the right to dictate who you are as male or female. And that's really kind of Gnostic, if you think about it. If you don't know what Gnosticism is and you don't care to think about it, then don't think about it. You can just ignore what it is. And then, of course, redemption. We're saved from the penalty of sin. We are progressively being saved from the power of sin. Some people come to Christ, and I don't know, maybe when you came to Christ, there were certain besetting sins that just, boom, disappeared just like that. For the rest of us, we came to Christ, and it's like really exciting, and we think, why do I still struggle with that thing? Well, because of the world, the flesh, and the devil, and we live in an inaugurated kingdom, not a consummated kingdom. But the promise of the gospel is that one day we will, see Christ, and we will become as He is. As He is. And so we call that glorification. It happens just like that. Right? We'll see Jesus, we'll become like Him, we'll become perfect. Until that time, though, we're in this process, and then John, in that 1 John chapter 3 passage, goes on to say, everyone who has this hope in Christ, this hope that we will one day be glorified, does what? Purifies himself, just as Christ is pure. Right? And so, it's a... How many of you remember the old 1980s version of Clash of the Titans? Anybody? Okay, all right. So there's this one scene in the movie, if you recall, I'm talking to the two people, where Zeus picks up Perseus, the protagonist, and he says, "Rise and fulfill your destiny." He says, I love that. I love that. Your destiny is to be like Jesus Christ, and that should get you really excited. And so what John is saying there, everyone has this hope, everyone who knows that this is your destiny to become like Jesus, everyone who knows that, rise and fulfill it. Start heading in that direction. Anything else, you're just wasting your time, basically. Because this is where you're going. You're going to spend all of eternity Christ-like. So why mess around until then, John seems to be saying. Get on the train now. Start heading in that direction. Don't wait for the, here's Jesus, don't lie in bed and wait for your sanctification to occur. No, move. Get going in that direction. You'll be glad you did. All right, so some continue to struggle for the whole time, and then we talk about glorification. Okay, so there's the biblical storyline. We need to remember that. I think we should spend lots of time reading Genesis 1 and 2, thinking about what is it to be man, what is it to be woman. And how many of you could give me a really good definition of what masculinity is? It's really hard to define, isn't it? I noticed that none of you raised your hand. Maybe you're going, I don't know, or maybe you're thinking, if I raise my hand and talk, that's just going to make this whole thing longer. And I'm starting to get hungry. So let me just tell you, it is really difficult to define masculinity, and it's difficult to define femininity as well. What is it? What are these things? They're hard. Most of the time, masculinity is just lampooned, especially on television. How many really popular, godly men are on television as characters on TV shows? There's not very many, are there? I mean, most of the time they're just kind of caricatures of manhood. So what is to be manhood? What is to be a man? You have to like football. You have to, drink beer. I suppose I don't know. Spit, yeah. Live like a bear in a cave, and hope that your wife puts up with you or whatever. I don't know. But they're difficult to define. Well, I think in the church we need to be thinking about these things, because the world's not going to tell men what it is to be a man, and the world's not going to tell women what it is to be a woman. And I think there are lies that are just foisted upon both men and women, and we listen to them, and it ruins us. There are feminist lies, and there are masculine lies. I mean, notice there's not a masculinist movement. Probably because men have been running things for so long. There doesn't need to be a masculinist movement. Anyway, all right. That's not what I came to tell you. All right. There are some different frameworks for this whole discussion. I still haven't got any, so what are we supposed to do with this? There are some different frameworks. So when people talk about so now we're back on gender dysphoria. When people talk about what gender dysphoria is, they'll come at it from 3 different places, generally speaking. And I'm getting this from a book by, I will recommend it to you, Mark Yarhouse. It's called Understanding Gender Dysphoria. I think every pastor should read this, probably every elder and every elder as well, and then anybody else who's interested in it. It's very clinical. Mark Yarhouse is an evangelical Christian, but he is a clinical psychologist, I believe. So he reads the literature. He knows what's going on there. So this book is very clinical, Understanding Gender Dysphoria. And the bibliography is down in the footnote here. There is what he calls an integrity model. And this is kind of more or less the Christian model. Male and female are part of design and the structure of creation. It's what I just spent time telling you about. Gender dysphoria denies and threatens the structure and design of creation. So gender dysphoria is eroding away at this integrity. That's more or less the Christian position, the integrity model. There's also, some people will approach gender dysphoria from a disability standpoint. And there are some Christians, and there's some truth to this as well. There are some Christians who embrace this wholeheartedly. I think we all should embrace it a little bit. I think every believing Christian needs to embrace the integrity model and aspects of the disability model. I'm just laying all my cards out on the table, telling you how you should think. In the disability model, it's a non-moral condition that's brought about by living in a broken world. And I think there's some truth to that. It's like a physical handicap. No one says that a person who's physically handicapped is sinning, right? But we recognize that they're physically handicapped because of the fall. In the same way, there are mental and psychological handicaps. It's not necessarily their fault. And I think, again, I'm laying my cards on the table. I think people undergo gender dysphoria. I think it is a real thing. And it's a real struggle. Just like there's depression out there. Okay, so I'm talking to you as one who, I don't have a depressed bone in my body. Now, that doesn't mean I'm like Joe Lampshade guy at the party. That's not me. I just don't get it. When my wife and other people in church talk about being depressed, I don't get it. So I just have to keep my mouth shut because I want to try to fix it, and my way of fixing it is saying, you don't have anything to be depressed about. or I say to people, you ought to be depressed. You've made really bad decisions. That kind of thing. So not helpful. So I just don't get it. Right? I just don't get it. I don't struggle. There's lots of things I struggle with. I won't tell you what they all are. But gender dysphoria is not one of them. Right? Gender dysphoria is not one of them. I just don't get it. I have no impulse whatsoever in this direction at all. I loved the Wonder Woman movie. Don't want to dress like her. But it's a real thing. It's a real thing. Okay. And now, maybe you were sitting there listening to me thinking, I can't believe you don't know what depression is. It is a real thing. Well, gender dysphoria is a real thing. It is a real thing. The individual, the young woman here who felt like she was actually a guy and wanted to be a guy, that was real. It's real. And I don't think it's necessarily her fault. And then there is the diversity model. And the diversity model is what what runs the academy. It's something to be celebrated, much like ethnicities and genders. There's all kinds of, it's kind of like, y'all have food courts here in Dallas? I don't know. Okay, Portland, there's food courts all over the place. Y'all been to food courts in Portland?
Yeah.
And they're just awesome, right? I love it. And I love having a wealth of options. I love it. It's what makes life great. Diversity. But for what, to what end? For what sake, right? And so in the same way that it's really cool to have an Ethiopian food cart and a Korean food cart and then all the different fusion food carts and all those in the same place, some people would say, isn't it really cool that we have male and female and boom, 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 all the different things that you could... I've totally lost track on Facebook as to how many different options you can place for what you are when it comes to sexual identity. It's like 40 or 50 or 60 or something, isn't it, option-wise? Y'all? Yeah. Okay. And so, and now, maybe to you, you're sitting there listening, going, what? That makes no sense. But there are some, and the movers and shakers in our world, who will say, isn't it great that there's all those different options for sexual identity? In the same way that all of you would agree, isn't it great that we have all those different options at the food courts? Right. So that's the diversity model, something to be celebrated. Okay, some other issues really quick. No known cause of gender dysphoria. People have been studying it for a long time. No one knows what caused it. There are lots of theories. Some are prenatal, some are due to hormonal deficiencies, some are psychosocial. There is no consensus at all. If a person comes to you and says, I know what causes gender dysphoria, they don't know what they're talking about. They just don't. Be kind when you tell them that. Gender dysphoria occurs in all age groups and all sexes. This is what's so frustrating to the American Pediatric Association. Is that what it's called? Suddenly the acronyms, I'm losing it. But they realize that little boys and little girls, they're curious and sometimes they might be a little confused, and that's normal. That's normal. What they're frustrated at is now that people are saying, oh, you know, they grab that little boy who feels like he would rather be a girl for a second and say, oh, well, this is to be celebrated, and then they start counseling towards that end, and they might even do hormonal therapy and such, and they're just like, oh, you can't do that, that's like child abuse. The American Pediatric Association, is pretty, is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. Okay, is very, they are univocal on this. Don't give hormones to little kids. Here, just a second. So here we are. Before that, one more other issue. It can be diagnosable, but gender dysphoria that rises to that level is actually quite rare. Often there are instances, gender bending, gender confusion, things of that sort that you'll see. What do we do with these different people? Children, behavior intervention, that seems to work. Counseling, waiting it out. That's usually the best medicine for like 99% of kids who experience some sort of gender confusion for a moment or two. Just wait it out, it'll go away. In some cases they will give hormones to suppress puberty, to allow, I think this is the goal, I think it's twisted, but that allows your body to wait until it, how about if I speak in complete sentences? By giving hormones that will suppress puberty, that will put off the body changes for a period until the child is able to make up his own mind, to the extent that children are able to do that. So that option is out there. I'm not advocating that, no. For adolescents and adults, there are lots of reversible treatments, counseling, some behavior stuff that they could have you do. Transvestites are people who just dress differently. That is a kind of reversible behavior therapy, honestly, that allows you to get through your gender dysphoria, I suppose. But it's reversible because you can always change your clothes, right? And then there's partially reversible hormone therapy. That will just suppress for a while, but then you can just start the hormones again, and it's partially reversible. And then there's the irreversible, or mostly irreversible, surgery. But again, I would remind us all that when it comes to surgeries, you're really not changing the sex at all. You can't. There's no such thing as a sex change operation. You can't be. If you're a man, you're a man, biologically. It's chromosomal. You take a blood sample, you take a skin sample, you take any sort of cell thing that makes you who you are, and you analyze that. 9 out of 9 doctors, heavens, 9 out of 10 dentists even would agree that that's a man, not a woman. Irreversible treatment, long-term outcomes. Studies are very early, but evidence suggests that it's pretty dangerous. Considerably higher risks of suicide completion and suicide attempts. Transsexuals are a group also demonstrated need long-term somatic and psychological follow-up and care. Transsexuals are those who have had the irreversible surgeries. I didn't say that earlier. What people are saying, the reason for this is because the world has been so nasty to them. But I don't know that we need to accept that at all. We ought not to be nasty to people. That is true. But it could be that there's deeper-seated reasons for the psychological problems that people have when they go through a sex change operation that is more than just people aren't being nice to me. Okay, on the irreversible treatment, long-term outcomes, it is so illogical. I don't understand it, but this is where our world's going. Does it ever feel at times like Satan's just overplaying his hand, and at some point you expect the world to go, oh, wait a second, that is just too stupid. You have overplayed your hand, we're going to take our foot off the gas. But we're not taking our foot off the gas. Trying to remake a man into a woman because they feel like they're a woman, when in fact they're actually a man, I think this is a mental illness. I think it's parallel to anorexia nervosa. Okay, well, what's going to anorexia? A person feels like they're overweight. Okay, I think this afflicts, I don't know, does that afflict more women than men? Mm-hmm. At least publicity-wise it seems to be the case. So I'll use a female example. A woman looks at herself and she sees a very fat person, when in fact they're not all that fat. Right? They're not, and oftentimes they're starving themselves to death. Remember Karen Carpenter, probably the earliest and the highest profile. Here I am. For those my age and older, remember Karen Carpenter? So she's the first one. She was skin and bones, right? But she thought she was fat. Reality was she was starving to death, right? And destroying herself because there wasn't any fat on her at all, right? And yet, so there was a mental disorder. It's a mental disorder. What she thought of herself didn't match with reality. Now, doesn't that sound a little bit like gender dysphoria to you? Now, and so it seems to me that if we're going to treat gender dysphoria by changing physically through surgery the sex of a person to match how they actually feel, isn't that kind of like treating anorexia with liposuction? Right? I mean, think about it. Isn't it just like that? Now, and I didn't just make that up. You know who says that? Well, I'll tell you exactly who it is so I don't get it. It is the Paul McHugh. He is the University Distinguished Professor of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins. Right? No dummy. And who knows what he's talking about here? Johns Hopkins is one of the most highly respected medical schools in the world. And this is what he says. Treating gender dysphoria with body-altering surgery is just like treating anorexia nervosa with liposuction. And it makes sense if you think about it. Okay. Then there's Christian counseling. Pastoral concerns. Look at this. Well, okay. I guess we'll just stop. Cause no.
Keep going.
Can I keep going for a second here? All right. Because this is why I'm supposed to come. Everything else was just prolegomena. Here's what I actually came to say. The pressure in society is to see gender dysphoria as something to be celebrated and then to solve it through an irreversible procedure. And you know, So that's our world right now. That's what we're in. Sexual diversity is celebrated in the effort to cure it. To cure somebody of so-called sinful behavior is going to be frowned upon. We need to just expect this. And this is what's troubling about where even sex education is going in America and in, quite frankly, our public schools. Full disclosure, I come from a family of public educators. My mom and my dad, all of my aunts, all of my uncles, on my wife's side, I married a public school teacher. Her parents, her dad was my algebra teacher. All of her aunts and uncles. I didn't even know what it was like to have a job during the summer. Because nobody I knew had a job during the summer. Right? So everything I'm about to tell you, I am not anti-public education. I'm just telling you it's going to get really hard. And one of the problems with the shifts in sex ed is that you could go through sex ed, say in the 80s or the 90s or even the 2000s, and you could be for abstinence and no one would say, you're evil for thinking that. You're evil for thinking that. That's beginning to shift now. And if you look at, say, transgenderism and say, you ought not to go there, you ought not to embrace that identity, that's not just your opinion. You're wrong for it. You're wrong. And that is a shameful position to hold. That's troubling. And it's harder in this world now to be faithful. But that's okay. I mean, Jesus never promised us that it was going to be easy, did he? I mean, I think being a Christian in America is largely pretty easy for a long time. It's getting harder now. All that means is now we're getting to the place where Jesus told us that it would be, and we're like the rest of the Christians around the world. Not very easy to be a Christian. Gender confusion in children is being magnified and cemented through early identification and normalization. What might be a normal curiosity for a child is now seized upon, it feels like, and becomes a meaning and identity-making issue. The question, is gender dysphoria a sin issue? People who experience gender dysphoria, I do not believe, are sinning, necessarily. I don't think we should say that. I don't think we should say to the person, stop feeling like you would rather be a woman than a man. Stop feeling that way. Stop feeling confused. Any more than we would tell a depressed person, just stop being depressed. Stop it. Stop it. It's I believe, a result of the fall. Acting out on that dysphoria, though, embracing a transgender identity, I do believe is a sin issue. Because you are now rejecting God's good authority in your life. In this case, the monumental issue of sexual identity. I do believe that is sin. Like if you were to, you don't even have to nail me to the wall. I just told you what I think. That's what I think. Accepting and pursuing a transgender identity is, in my opinion, sin. For us, though, the church, we think about this. Would an unbelieving transvestite or an unbeliever struggling with gender dysphoria, would they feel welcome in your church? They should. The church should be the safest place on earth for people, for sinners to come who are interested in who God is. If God is working in their life, if God is calling them to himself, the church should be the place that opens their arms up and says, you come. You come. We will not judge you. We will tell you what sin is and what it's not, but you are welcome because we are all broken people living in this broken world full of other broken people. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, what kind of church does Grace Community need to be in order to welcome sinners in? Jesus Christ was a friend of sinners, which is mind-numbing to me. The people, and of course, we're not ever going to be exactly like this, because Jesus was Jesus. Write that down. But the very people who should have felt most rejected by Jesus were the people who just could not get enough of him. And no one could accuse Jesus, and they certainly wouldn't have, of compromising. They felt their sin more acutely when they were around Jesus than any other time, and yet they still wanted to be with him. How is that? How is that? That's what we need to be. That's what Grace Community needs to be. A place where people, because of the grace that is here, they feel their sin just like you feel your sin. I mean, isn't it true? Hopefully, isn't it true that you feel your sin more acutely when you are in fellowship and you are sitting under the preaching of God's Word than at any other time? I mean, I hope that's true. Well, that should be true of all people who come here. They feel it more acutely. And yet, don't you want to be here? Don't you want to be here? Even though sometimes it feels like a bummer. Even though you feel a little beat up when you walk out the door. Like Dave was just too close this last Sunday. You need to be thinking about that. Now, what does that mean? How welcoming and affirming are you? Now, so like when I walked in here, I had two different people come up and just kind of chat me up, and starting in the parking lot. And where are you? Who was it who talked to me in the parking lot as we were walking in? Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, super kind, super kind. That was great. It made me feel very, very welcome.
Thanks.
Right? Well done. And I don't know your name. I'm Todd. What's that?
McLaren.
McLaren, yes. Well done. Well done. Because you didn't have to, right? Who am I? She didn't know I was here to talk or anything. But I was a person who walked in the door. I would hope that you would be like McLaren. With everybody who walks in. Make them feel welcome. And then also, what kind of whisper campaign is going on? Like if a person struggling with gender dysphoria were to listen in on some of the discussions, how would that make them feel? Is there like a joking mockery of the struggles that all those people out there are going through? But we know none of us are here, so we can laugh about it and joke about it. But those can be devastating because you never know who's struggling. And why, if like the group of men or the group of women that they're around are kind of mocking it and laughing about it, would they ever open up and say, man, guys, I got to tell you that I struggle with this. So be conscious of that. That'd be a good thing to do. I need to stop here. We need to train up our churches to walk in humility. Feel welcome. There are lots of ministries out there that are devoted to counseling individuals who have undergone irreversible procedures and now regret their decisions. They're actually full-blown. It is so common now for people to go through a seeming irreversible procedure and then totally regret it, that it plunges them into the need for deep counseling. There's entire ministries devoted to that. That's how prevalent the issue is. And you can go online and find it. Think through this in your children's curriculum. Does your church know what it is to be male or female, masculine, feminine, in a biblical sense? How much of what your church believes is actually a social construct? There's a church culture, especially with men's ministries and probably women's ministries as well. I'm not as familiar with those for obvious reasons. Haven't spent a lot of time in ladies' Bible studies, so but I do know what men's ministries are like, and I like them. I like men's ministries. It's a great thing. Pastors have to be informed on the issue. Gender dysphoria is a weird thing because it's not the same as homosexuality. The T-folk and the LGBTQ community, they don't see themselves as homosexual. They don't. And so much so that there's actually a big campaign right now in the homosexual community to drop the T from LGBTQ because it's so different, and it's even recognized as being different by the gay and lesbian groups. Bathroom issues, I don't know what, so now I'm probably just talking to the pastors and elders and such here. It might be a good idea to have a quote-unquote family restroom that's neither male nor female. But there's lots of good reasons to do that have nothing to do with this issue at all. We had at my church, we had to put a family restroom in. And it was funny when we made the announcement, because some guy got up and said, well, the city of Portland was pressuring us to have a family restroom so the transgender folk can use theirs. And it was just terrible what he said. And I had to get up and actually correct him and say, no, it doesn't. It's because, sweet John, with his wife who is handicapped, he has to take her into the bathroom. And she's uncomfortable going into a men's restroom, and so here's John wheeling his wife into the ladies' restroom. And that makes all the other ladies a little uncomfortable who are in the bathroom. All right, so that's why we did a family restroom. Jerk. Jeez. just totally violated. I didn't actually say that, but I was thinking that. Okay, so now you're getting some of the things I struggle with. Anyway, so imagine if you're a guy or a woman who's just struggling with a little bit of gender dysphoria, or maybe a whole bunch of gender dysphoria, or you're a visitor that day, and then you have this guy get up and make his bathroom announcement about how this stupid city of Portland is making us do this stupid thing. I mean, it had absolutely nothing to do with it. There were really good reasons for us to do that, but it does create a space for them as well. So there's lots of good reasons to do that. What to do? Listen to what Dave and Ben said this morning. Hopefully all the time. Keep listening to them. But what they said this morning: be gospel saturated. Gospel saturated. We need the gospel. I love Ben saying the gospel is not a diving board into the pool of the Christian life. The gospel is the Christian life, and so it addresses this. When we're thinking about the gospel all the time, hopefully we're not thinking of about those people over there with their creepy sin. No, I mean this is a simple way to think of it, but quite frankly, your sin is enormously offensive to God. Your sin is far more offensive to God than other people's sin is to you. The worst sin and how offensive that is to you doesn't compare to how offended God is by your sin. That's kind of humbling to think about, but it's true. Right? It doesn't take too much thought for us to come to that conclusion. Yeah, that's true. God's holy. I'm not. God doesn't sin. God eats sin. We kind of like it. Yeah. Okay. So I'll stop there. There's other stuff on the paper. You can read that yourself. Any questions? I know, because it's time to eat.